Build 1558. This build is the very first appearance of the ANTICHRIST area. Now, full disclosure here, the footage you're about to see is not mine. I was unable to get this build working. Even my friends on Discord weren't able to get this build actually working. So I got this footage from another YouTuber, which you can see on the screen right now. He's the one that actually managed to record this build in the first place. Now this build is pretty interesting. It is the very first appearance of the early ANTICHRIST level. It is also used as a test for basically a improved physics system for the vehicles. And I don't think I even need to point this out, but look how massive this map used to be. Like, ANTICHRIST used to be gigantic compared to the one we got on release. Like, this is what a dried up river is supposed to look like, okay? Like that ass shit that we got on release, dude, it ain't got nothing on this. Like, this is what a giant dry riverbed looks like. And to be honest, I think the facility in this one is just a lot cooler. Instead of just being this abandoned factory with an underground location, it's actually, you know, this actual institute looking location. You can also see the first bunker of the scientist in this map, although I'm not sure if he visits it on the footage. Hopefully he does. But as you can see, it is much larger. And this is where you would face off against the creature in the mist, quote unquote. This creature in the mist is basically an early version of the X-16 brain. In the final game, the brain basically creates this psi emission around the factory. But originally, the brain was supposed to create this mist that kind of just stayed around the institute and in some parts of Yantar. And this mist was deadly. Basically, if you walk into the mist, it will cause psychic damage and you die. So that's why it was called the creature in the fog or the creature in the mist. So its powers were a little bit different originally. Instead of just being a normal psi field, it would basically create this fog that surrounds the map. Oh yes, build 1580. Now this build is very important and it's the coolest one in this entire episode. Why? Well, welcome to Pripyat. Yeah baby, it is the first Pripyat ever made. Now already from the get-go you can see some differences. Like for example this road here, this used to be the original entrance to the Chernobyl power plant. Another difference is this schoolhouse building, which was completely removed from the release game, but here it is in its original form. It is extremely similar. In fact, it's a direct copy of the same school building present in the Dead City. It is obviously a reused asset. And it's the same thing as the one in Dead City. It's an empty, destroyed, and just ruins of a old schoolhouse with furniture all over the place. Now if I go outside here, I will give you a nice, panoramic view of the entire city by getting on top of one of these commie blocks. And as you can see, there are already some very, very familiar buildings here. This is because the Pripyat city didn't really change that much throughout development. Of course, it did, change some things and alter others, but the basic architecture is kind of the same. Like you can already recognize, the hotel, the culture center, the little side building, this building right here with the 1917-1986 sign. Like these are all very familiar. If you play the release game, you already recognize these areas. And of course, we can't forget about one of the most iconic pieces of architecture in Pripyat, the Ferris wheel. And it's pretty much in the exact same area that it shows up in release. The only difference is, I think, the direction it's facing is different, but that's it. And if we turn around here, we have another very important area that suffered some major changes. The stadium. Now the Pripyat stadium was a little bit different, during the build phase compared to its release phase. It only had one set of, seating areas over there. It had this weird track running around it, and the whole stadium just looks ever so slightly different with those nice little, early build textures. Now I'm gonna pan out here and show you the entire city in one single shot so that I can talk about something interesting that I noticed, in comparison to the release version of Pripyat. Now, if you ever finish Shadow Chernobyl, you know that the final place you have to pass through to get to the Chernobyl power plant is the Pripyat Stadium. It is the entrance to the Chernobyl power plant. However, in this one, it was actually the opposite. The Pripyat Stadium was the entrance to Pripyat. This is where you would spawn in, this is where you would arrive from radar. And that road all the way over there, that's the entrance to the Chernobyl power plant. That is where the player was originally supposed to go to reach it. So basically what happened is they took the map and basically flipped it for the release version. So the entrance became the exit and the exit became the entrance. And here we have build 1610. Now this build is pretty interesting. Already you can see that this is the first iteration of the reactor 4 area. If you remember, in the previous episode we explored some parts of the sarcophagus. However, as if you remember, there was no reactor 4. The reactor 4 area just wasn't complete yet. Well, now here it is, reactor 4. Although you will notice that at this point in development the monolith is still missing, and also there's no outside. Obviously this is a interior, and this build is actually created to test one specific feature, the flashlight. See, I'm currently using demo record to fly around, but normally when you spawn in you're able to pick up a flashlight off the ground and use it. At least in theory, because I tried doing that and for some reason, no matter how many times I press L, the flashlight just won't work. So maybe my build is just broken, like the flashlight for me just refuses to work. So instead I'm just gonna give you a nice overview of the reactor 4 area, which is very interesting because they changed the texture here. As you can see from the reactor 4, originally it was supposed to have almost this molten lava look to the bottom of the reactor, which to be honest might be kind of realistic, because if I'm not mistaken there's still some radioactive material that's burning up to this day, so this was kind of accurate. But later on they changed that. Now there isn't really much of a point to me showing you the rest of the map because it's just the same sarcophagus that I showed you last episode. The reactor 4 is the only new addition in all of this. So it's the same sarcophagus, but they finally put the reactor 4 in there. And now on to 1616. Now this build was compiled and created for only one specific purpose: to serve as a weapons test. Basically, this whole map is just one giant shooting range. As you can see, there's a bunch of NPCs on top of those little pillars there. The objective is obvious. This is here to test if the guns are working correctly by seeing if you can, well, kill the NPCs. This is just a giant test area that's kind of surrounded by some concrete walls, so there isn't really much more to show, except for the weapons range, which does extend quite far away, probably for testing the snipers, most likely. It's very interesting to see a map like this in S.T.A.L.K.E.R. Like most of the time these builds are situated, in early versions of a map that already exists, like for example Garbage or Cordon. So to see a purely test map made for no other purpose but just for, development is pretty interesting. It uses these white blocks that I don't think are used anywhere. There's probably just some kind of like textureless object that you can spawn in the X-ray engine. And here on the floor we can find the entire, what I like to call, BUILDO arsenal. This is basically every single weapon that you could use in pretty much all of these builds. It is worth noting that there's one weapon in this arsenal that never made it to release, and that's the TOS shotgun. So all the weapons here were eventually remodeled and reanimated, and they made it to release, but not the TOS. The TOS never made it to release. It took until Clear Sky for it to finally be included in the game. So I'm just gonna give you a couple seconds here to look upon the arsenal of the BUILDO. build 1623. Now this build right here is yet another test map, but this one is to test out the wind particles. It also features one of the very first bloodsuckers that actually has, basic AI. Instead of just being a model that stands around and does idle animations, this one actually has, the ability to move around, walk, and even detect and attack the player. Although this is a very, very early one. Like, it is the most basic, simple AI you can think of. It also has one of the weirdest walk animations I have ever seen, and I'll show you the animation in just a second here, but this is what the build is to test, these air particles here. It also has a gigantic tree smack dab in the middle of the map. I have a theory as to what they were using it for, but I'll tell you that later. First off, let me show you the bloodsucker walk animation here. There's also this weird building here that I have no idea what they use this building for. Maybe it was some kind of shooting range with those red, things over there as targets. But I'm gonna be honest, I have no clue what this construction here was supposed to test. It's just a very weird looking building. It probably was some kind of test range, who knows. And now, if we fly up here, we can get to this giant crane. Now, as you can see, on top of the crane, there's even more of those wind particles. Now, I have a little bit of a schizo theory as to, what the purpose of testing wind particles on top of a crane, could possibly be for. You see, remember in the Chernobyl power plant, how it has those giant cranes all over the place? Well, what if at some point in development they decided that the player would be able to, maybe they would get teleported or something, the player would have to walk on top of the crane. If that happened, then having these wind particles just blowing wind into the player would make for a really cool sense of height. You know what I mean? You're way up in the sky and the wind is just blasting through you. Maybe that is why they built this little, crane demonstration here. Again, I have zero proof of this. This is just an idea that I got when I played the build. And it's just something I cooked up as some kind of way to explain why they were testing wind particles on top of a crane. But regardless, this is just overall a very basic, simple build to test a basic and simple mechanic. Alright, so here we are in build 1629. Now, this one was specifically created to test new upgrades that were made for the bloodsucker AI. Because if you remember, in the last build, his AI was ridiculously simple and could, barely even walk forward. Well, in this one, they kind of fix him. So I'm just gonna show you the new behaviors he has acquired in this one, if I can find them, that is. He also displays some abilities and attributes that never made it to release as well. So trust me, seeing this will be pretty exciting. And he should be around here somewhere. Oh, there he is. Now, as you can already see, he's a lot more complete than the one in the previous build. First of all, he can actually, move at a reasonable speed. He's able to run. And as you can see, his invisibility wasn't finished yet. So instead of an actual invisibility effect, they basically just make him disappear and flicker out of existence every now and again. That's how the invisibility is done. They just make him disappear, literally disappear for a couple of seconds. So as you can see, very early, obviously, like later on they actually give him a, you know, a kind of a shimmer effect. Now I'm kind of tired of this guy just running after me, so I think I'm just gonna put a cap on his ass. Now you can see when his health gets low, he starts to very slowly walk towards you with a hand in his chest. Obviously because, you know, he's low on health, he's wounded. But there's something interesting about this specific state. In this state, when the bloodsucker is wounded, he actually shows some behaviors that never made it to release. Like they only show up in this build and later on they got cut. One of them is that he seems to just give up sometimes. Like if he's too heavily wounded and you keep just walking away, he might just cut the chase and stop going after you. I don't know if you saw earlier, but sometimes, you know, when I moved away, he just stopped. Yeah, like he just does that sometimes. Like if he's too injured, he might just decide that it's not worth it. And if you're too far away, he just stops going after you. Like that is a pretty cool feature. Another thing is that, as you can see, he can no longer turn invisible. So when he's wounded, his invisibility just stops. He's no longer able to go invisible, something that is obviously not present in the final game. In the release game, they can go invisible whenever they want. So overall, just an early version of the Bloodsucker with some unique features that never made it. So that's another episode of Buildo done, and I would like to take this time to very quickly just apologize for, you know, how long it took to upload this video. It's because as of late I've been getting a lot busier. Like I'm very busy. So because of that, I just haven't really been able to just sit down and record as much as I used to before. But don't worry, like even if it takes longer for these videos to come out, I will always make build. Like I'm dedicated to cataloging every single build, so don't worry. It might just take like a couple more weeks every now and again, but I will continue uploading. With that out of the way, thank you for watching.